Maureen Flanagan, former actress and one of Britain's first page 3 girls, met the Kray family when she was just 17.
1961. Well, London was buzzing, swinging 60s was just beginning, everything was changing, fashion, politics, we had the pill. Some women were going out to work, like me, and it was a very busy area, most respectful, and that's when I met the notorious Kray family. I met Charlie, the elder brother. He was the elder by 7 years from the twins. I met him first, found him most handsome and charming. Then he introduced me to his mother at their house in Valence Road. He said she wanted someone to come home and do her hair every week, rather than sit in a salon and be inundated with requests, which she always was. So along I went. I met this charming, lovely, kind, typical East End mother, who just happened to be the mother of the most notorious men in London. She couldn't sit in a hairdressing salon without someone saying, do you think Ronnie could speak to this one? We're having a little problem with this neighbour. Could Reggie come down and speak to them? The poor woman just couldn't go anywhere, so hence I went home to do the hair.
I used to go round the Krays' house as a friend, because how I met them, I saw this woman in Bethnal Green Road in shopping bags, and I said, old lady, can I give you a hand? She said, oh, would you, son? So anyway, she lived in Valence Road. I didn't know who she was. When I got to her doorstep, I went to give her the bag, said, come and have a cup of tea. I couldn't believe it. 2 geezers in there, you couldn't tell them apart. That was Ronnie and Reggie.
I found Mrs. Kray, Violet, a wonderful child. I had an affinity with her the minute I met her. I knew I'd have a friend for life. Typical mother who loved and adored her 3 sons. I think Charlie got pushed out a little bit with her affection for the twins, and they were always demanding of her time. Mr. Kray, who I always called Mr. Kray and never called Charles the whole years I met him, I found him quite a withdrawn, miserable man, but then he wasn't there very often, hence no authority, no fatherly authority in the house. When he came back, I mean, the boys, as they were growing, had taken over the house, and his word went for nothing. And in the early days, I mean, he was quite abusive to Violet. She told me this herself. And one day when he was being abusive to her, he didn't know Ronnie was in the house. I think Ronnie was about 17 then, and he was upstairs and he heard that he'd hit her. And he ran down the stairs and he had him up against the wall and said, if you touch our mother again, I'll kill you. And I basically think he definitely meant that. A lot of people ask me who was the dominant twin, and a lot of people really believe it was Ronnie. It may have come more like that as he got older. I don't think at the beginning, Mrs. Kray never told me that there was a dominant twin. They used to call them the 2 ones where they lived, because, and I still believe they were 2 people, but in one person. As they grew older, and Ronnie's illness, he became a paranoid schizophrenic, which he was for the rest of his life, untreated. And when he went into his violent rages, I think, there's only 2 people on earth that could stop him, and that was Violet Kray, his mother, and Reggie. So I think Reggie slipped into that role as pacifier and to look after him.
Somehow, amongst all of the bloodletting and hatred, Reggie Kray found love. Initially, his heart was stolen by a young man, but when he rejected his advances, Reggie accepted second best and started a relationship with the man's sister, a beautiful young girl named Shea.
Reggie knew Frances, I think, from the age about 14, but first of all, he knew her brother. I mean, they were 2 good-looking kids, but basically, from a woman's point of view, I think the brother was even better looking than the sister. The brother looked like a very, very young Montgomery Cliff. That's who I can only think of. Beautiful, and I think Reggie, who had tendencies to be as gay as his brother, I think really fancied the brother. I think at the very, very beginning, probably young teenage years, they were both bisexual. But then again, Ronnie, as Violet told me, Ronnie had girlfriends. He had 2 girlfriends that both were known to Violet, and both that he definitely slept with, but his preference then changed completely then. After, I think, about 16, 17 years of age, his preference was boys. Reggie, on the other hand, had girlfriends, but definitely being bisexual, and I think probably would have had an affair with the brother first, had it been consented, but the brother didn't want to know. And then he'd met the sister, who was equally beautiful, and started this love affair. The mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. Shea, did not like him. They didn't want their daughter to be with them, but they persevered, and eventually she became his girlfriend. Although she had tendencies like mental health tendencies, she was on medication, she was nervous. The first time I met Frances, she was sort of with Reggie as they walked in the door. I thought, I'd been told she was pretty, quiet, quite vulnerable, timid, nervous, and that's exactly what I saw. And he would just put her there with Violet and say, I'll be back later. Even 5 minutes after he walked out the door, she'd look at the clock and say, what time do you think he'd be back? And he will be coming back for me. And fidgeting with the gloves, she wore these little white gloves, fidgeting, nervous. All she ever wanted to be was to be with him. At the beginning, of course, and he treated her like a princess. Ronnie hated that because it was somebody, at last, he'd found somebody, Reggie, that he really, really fell in love with. He was absolutely, he adored her. Treated her like a princess, gave her everything, delivered clothes to her house, shoes. She couldn't even go to a shop to pick a dress, like we could go. They were delivered there for her to choose, and Ronnie absolutely hated that. And he had no intentions, or so he thought at the time, to let this marriage go ahead, and he did everything in his power to stop this marriage. Why do you want to get married? You know, we're together. And it seemed though nobody could take Reggie away from him. Very jealous of Frances, he was. But eventually the marriage did take place. But he never liked Frances, ever, Ronnie.
His wife Frances was no longer the starry-eyed young girl. She was Reggie Kray's missus, his property. The pressures this caused led to rows between the couple, which became hideously abusive. Eventually Frances had packed her bags and returned to her parents' home. In the summer of 1967, Reggie and his wife were reunited. On the 6th of June, the couple booked a holiday to Ibiza. 2 days later, Frances was found dead in her bed. She was just 23 years old.
I think the person that murdered Frances, and I'm sorry to say this, but categorizing the times that I've spent with her, and this will be a shock to everybody, but it was a no-nonsense effort because Frances got pregnant. Nobody knows that, but I do. She had what they called bulimia and was a very manic depressive. She didn't like Ronnie in any way, shape or form. But I think maybe the mother had something to do with Frances's death. Not Reggie, he loved her too much. Ronnie tolerated her because it kept him stable.
She was timid, vulnerable, she was on medication. She had mental issues, but Mrs. Kray could never have treated her badly. And as for this ridiculous notion that Ronnie had anything to do with her death, I would dispute that to my dying day, because although he didn't like her, he would never have harmed her in any way because Reggie would never have forgiven him. That's when they would have broke, and they could never be broken in half, those two.
But I do think that Frances was a suspicious death, but I don't think Violet Kray liked Frances whatsoever. She was jealous of her because she was losing one of her babies. And they were going out more. They were going to the seaside, they went to Spain. Ronnie wouldn't let him go on his own because he was frightened she might take him away. He was jealous. He was so, so jealous of her. The only thing he loved, which is something I wouldn't call as a pet, maybe people that love these sort of reptiles do, is when Ronnie had a snake. In my summing up on that, having a snake is what sort of thing the devil would have around his feet. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Ronnie would have killed his wife.
When she committed suicide, I mean, we saw a completely different Reg. He was untidy, unshaven, which was totally, you know, the opposite to what they really were. He was drunk. He'd come in very drunk. She'd tell me, Violet, that he came in 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, stumbling in, but hadn't gone even out smart, hadn't put a clean shirt on, totally different. He was devastated. He really, really loved her. And I think if he could have broken away from Ronnie, they may have moved out of London, maybe had a good life, maybe got, you know, had a couple of kids. He might have been a different person. I sat next to Violet Kray at the trial on a couple of occasions, and as the witnesses were going into the box and informing on them now that they were incarcerated, Nipper Reed had got to the witnesses and they were all informing. She was turning to me and saying, "Why are these people telling these lies? These people have sat in my house. They've drunk my tea, ate my sandwiches. They've been looked after by the twins. They've been bought suits and cars and watches. Why are they doing this?" She totally believed that it was all lies, that they'd been got at by the police to put the 2 boys away, or 3 boys away, I should say, but particularly the twins. And she just didn't believe it till the very, very last day. Even when they were sentenced to that, she just didn't believe what they did.
The Krays did their sorry best to live out their lives in prison, whilst clinging to a reputation that was being diluted by every embarrassing episode that was being carried out by their minions. The press began to humiliate the twins, and many former firm members began to publicly ridicule them. Ronnie, whose name meant everything to him, was spared the worst of the criticism when he passed away in March 1995.
I'd been to Broadmoor about 2 weeks before he died, and he looked very pale and a little bit dishevelled, which was very unusual. And I asked him, I said, "Have you changed your medication?" And he said, "Yeah, they've got me on some other pills." That was quite a funny day, actually, because he said, "I don't even know why I'm still in this place." He said, "They're all mad in here." And I turned around and I said, you know, I was with Jack Lee and I was with Tony Lambriano. I said, "But Ronnie, you are mad." And it all went silent, you know. And he said, "Good job you're a woman." In other words, if a man had said that, I'd have been no more. And then I was at home when I literally heard it on the news. And I spoke to several people in the East End. They said, "Yeah, it's true." And then I was phoned by Reggie the following day saying, "I want you to do the seating in the church. He's going to be buried like he always wants to, like a king." There were 26 limos. There's the famous picture of the 26 limos going over the Bow flyover. Quite a sad day for Reggie because he wasn't allowed to go into a funeral car with his brother, Charlie. He had to travel behind the horses with the carriage in a prison van, handcuffed in the church. We did ask as soon as he arrived, could he just be unhandcuffed for the service? No, they said, like as if he was going to escape and stop his parole or pay disrespect to his twin brother. And he did the whole thing with dignity.
In August 2000, Reggie Kray was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He had served 32 years, and so the Home Secretary granted him compassionate parole. He never did get to walk the streets of the East End again, where he and his twin had once ruled. Reggie was transferred to a hotel in Norwich. He couldn't afford to pay for the room, and so a friend footed the bill. On his deathbed, he confessed to another murder. Although he did not name the victim, Nipper Reed, the detective who investigated the Krays, later confirmed that the victim was Mad Teddy Smith. Smith was a psychopathic homosexual, rumoured to have had affairs with Ronnie Kray and Tom Dryburgh, the former Labour MP. Smith disappeared in 1967 after an argument with the Krays. No doubt he ended up with Marks, Mitchell and McVitie. On the 1st of October 2000, Reggie died in his sleep. 10 days later, he was laid to rest with his twin brother Ronnie.
Reggie, I say, was the saddest funeral, because having married, once I'd refused my 3 proposals from him, he married a lady called Roberta. She was with him 4 years, I think it was. She met him in Maidstone. I took her to Maidstone, actually, introduced her. She got on very well with him, and eventually they married. But she changed the whole sequence, which she was allowed to do because she was the widow. She changed the pallbearers, which would upset people like Freddie Foreman, one of the Nash brothers from Highbury, Teddy Dennis. People that would carry the other 2 brothers were not allowed to carry Reggie, but that was her right. When I phoned her up and said why, she said, I don't want to be associated with these people. Reggie's pulled away from that in the last 2 years of his life. He was looking forward to release. He was looking forward to working with young offenders, which I know was true, because I'd set up a few things ready for him when he came out. She just changed, and therefore it was sad, because all the old school, his old friends, such as Frank Fraser and Fred, they were just sort of dismissed to a pew in the church. And it angered a lot of people. Hence, we had 2 wakes. She took her people to one pub, and our people went to another pub, which has never been done in any other Kray funeral. A lot of people that visited Reggie were given short, sharp lessons, like, do you want to spend your life like me in here? Like, look what I could have done. He regretted at the end of his life, and told me so on several occasions. Ronnie never regretted. He never apologised. He never reformed.